we will be hearing from Matt McGlone, who is the county of PEMA, the Office of Emergency Management. He is the outreach manager there. And then we have Lad Keith, an assistant professor in the School of Landscape Architecture and Planning, who co-wrote the book, Planning for Urban Heat Resilience. Jackie Day is an educator with the Physicians for Social Responsibility, giving workshops in person and online as the neighborhood requests. And Joe Tabor is a lead environmental epidemiologist at Pima County Health Department. And we are so excited and gratified that you are with us tonight. Our process will be, I'm going to ask a question, and then each panelist will answer that question with a 3-minute limit. And that's so we don't just go on and on tonight. We all want to get back to dessert at 7:30 or maybe a little twilight walk. After we've done 5 questions, then there will be audience Q&A. As time allows, of course, the panelists may wish to ask each other a question or two. Just to know that Sustainable Tucson is very big on looking carefully, critically at issues large and small, and very big at looking at everyone with an open heart. And so if someone says something, you think, well, they don't know what they're talking about, we always find a way to ask questions or wait for a good time to bring up an alternative point of view rather than stressing out. Our goal here is to make a difference here in the world, particularly in this little part of the world called Pima County, without stressing ourselves or others out for maximum effect, for maximum benefit for the community. So welcome again to Joe Tabor. He's on the heat relief team for Pima County Health Department. Lad Keith is a much in demand speaker on the issues of heat resilience in cities, and the book that he and his co-author, who's an ASU professor, wrote on urban heat resilience planning. It's a very beautiful thing to look at. Lots of great pictures, lots of explanations. If you want to go into this topic more, I can recommend that book. Matt McGlone, as the Office of Emergency Management for the county, he's the outreach manager. He has a background, and Matt, you will correct me if I got some of this wrong. This is from memory. Matt worked for the City of Tucson Police Department.
She's not
He's been involved in sports from high school, at least, if not earlier, and in college, I believe also has coached football, at least at the community level. And again, Matt, correct me if I got those credentials wrong, but he's committed, like every good sports person, to having fun while getting the job done. And Jackie Day has experience with Peace Corps. She is involved with the Milagro Community Co-housing, where they have done a lot of resilience preparations within that community. And she's a lead educator with Physicians for Social Responsibility. I think I can mute everybody. There's some way I can do that, but I'm not sure how. So how about if you could mute yourself? Oh wait, I know it. There we go, thank you. And that way, unless you're talking, please unmute if you are talking. Let's start with Joe. What concerns you most? Oh, I forgot. Garrett is going to be the timekeeper. And Garrett, do you have that piece of yellow paper we talked about?
Yes, I do. And I also have my stopwatch here.
Oh,
and when we are 2 minutes and 30 seconds in, I will raise up a yellow piece of paper signaled here. And when we are at 3 minutes into an answer, I will raise up the red piece of paper to indicate that we are out of time.
Thank you, Garrett. Okay, so Joe, what concerns you most about our warming climate?
Well, thank you for inviting me and seeing some familiar faces and some new faces. So what concerns me is the intensification of the weather events that are directly affecting and disrupting life, all kinds of life on this planet, and their effects on ecosystem services. I mean, these services generally aren't factored in the economic analysis, and those include stuff like agrosystems, forest ecosystems, grassland systems, aquatic ecosystems, just for a few. And they have an important role in keeping our climate and productivity and diversity intact.
Well, thank you, Joe. It sounds like we're going to roll through these quickly, and that's a great way to start us. So same question for you, Lad. What has you most concerned about the warming climate?
Great, thank you, Stuart. I'm happy to be here today, and unfortunately, as a professor, I probably won't have as succinct an answer as Joe did, but I'll keep my own stopwatch going to stay under the 3-minute mark. I would say, my whole job is thinking about climate change, so all of it concerns me, but specifically, we've already seen average annual temperatures in the US rise by 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit in the last century. And that's projected to rise by as much as 12 degrees by 2100 if greenhouse gas emissions continue at their current pace. And with that, we've seen the increase in frequency, duration, seasonality, intensity of those extreme heat events. For example, EPA put out a report that since the 1960s, or in the 1960s, heat waves occurred about twice per year across the United States. And we've seen a steady rise in those. And so in the last decade, it's increased to at least 6 per year. And so it's not just your imagination, we actually are experiencing more of these heat waves more frequently. So I think my big concern about that is, the extreme events, both heat related, flood related, drought related, all of the above, those are occurring with the greenhouse gas emissions that we've already emitted, and not taking into account the fact that we're actually making the climate of the future worse. And so the new US federal legislation passed recently is a step in the right direction, but global greenhouse gas emissions are not being cut fast enough to avoid the worst case scenario still. So that's a big concern. The second bucket that I would say is just the urban heat island effect and urban heat. And so obviously we have climate change on one hand, increasing temperatures, but the way that we plan and design our cities are also increasing the temperature that we experience in urban areas. And that that urban heat is not equitably distributed. And so we know that in Tucson, as well as any other city in the United States, lower income marginalized communities often have higher heat severity than their richer counterparts. Due to things like lack of vegetation, more infrastructure. And so those populations and communities are unfortunately exposed to higher temperatures as well. And so kind of what concerns me about that bucket is just that the way that we're still planning and designing our cities as of today is still increasing that urban heat. And I think we are seeing a shift and seeing more cities thinking about heat in a different way the last couple of years, which is positive. But it takes hundreds of years to develop cities, and we didn't become Tucson as we are now overnight, and it's going to take quite a while to kind of retrofit the built environment to decrease and mitigate that heat as much as possible. So I think we have a lot of work ahead of us.
Thank you so much, Lad. And let's go right now to Matt.
Well, you guys are in luck. we won't have to worry about me being as eloquent as Joe or as detailed as Lad. I've had the opportunity to work with Lad and hear a lot of the great information that he puts out. So good seeing you, Lad. I would say the concerns that from an emergency management standpoint, we're most concerned about responsibility and being prepared, and that's an individual as well as a community responsibility. And my concern would be the community taking heat emergencies serious. And we seem to do a really great job of taking cold and severe cold serious in lots of parts of the country, but we don't seem to take heat as serious. And I think Lad's going to do his next doctorate probably on the difference between those two.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so Jackie, what could you add? What has you concerned about our warming climate?
Well, I think that it's denial in some of the highest levels of government. which has led to, I think, a lack of preparedness. And it does leave it to us on the ground level, working with our local communities, leaves it to us. But what concerns me most is the unwarranted deaths, you know, and just destruction of property that's happening with these extreme weather events. And my big concern is lack of preparation, both on the individual, community level, and in the city, state, and the United States, and the world. Actually, that more needs to be being done.
All right, thank you. Well, each of you have definitely touched on the perspective from your professional work, and it's great to hear these different answers. So this may seem similar, but let's go around now again with the question, why should we care about extreme heat? And if you repeat something, if that's what you've got to do to answer, that's fine. Maybe we can hear it in slightly different words. And so we'll start again with Joe.
Okay, well, it's on magnitude and equity. Extreme heat is responsible for most weather-related deaths in the US and especially Arizona by far. And it disproportionately affects the poor and the elderly. And I will yield to the others.
I think glad that makes you next.
All right. Yeah, so of course, public health and heat-related illnesses and deaths are probably the biggest concern, rightly so. As Joe said, it's the #1 weather-related cause of death in the United States, but I would say largely still unrecognized outside of Joe and my and Matt circles, Jackie circles, kind of because we visually pay more attention to things like hurricanes and floods and dramatic wildfires, right? They're more kind of visually arresting. So I think there's still kind of a misperception about how deadly and impactful heat really is. And just for some context, in Arizona, we're trending in the wrong direction, even though we're doing more for heat every year. You know, in 2019, we had 283 heat-related deaths that were documented. And by 2021, that number was up to 552. And so, we're definitely trending in the wrong direction for heat-related deaths. And, you know, the heat dome in the Pacific Northwest last year killed about 1,400 people. And I like to point out that Hurricane Katrina tragically killed about 1,800 people. But kind of think of the policy response at the national level that we had for a Hurricane Katrina type event versus kind of the lack of action for 1,400 deaths due to a heat wave in the Pacific Northwest. So I think that's a little bit striking, right? I think in the Southwest, one thing that Joe certainly is on the same page about is it's not just the extreme heat events like heat waves here that matter, but we have chronic heat that's dangerous and deadly for people for a large proportion of our year. So it's both those heat waves when they occur, but also just the chronic temperatures that people are exposed to in their everyday lives. Outside of the health components, I would say as a planner, I think about the infrastructure of our cities. It's degraded. We spend more money on infrastructure like roadways, our buildings, our energy and water use go up substantially during, you know, normally chronically hot times, but also during heat waves. And as we saw in California, you know, the last week even, they had to put out a public notice and actually beg their residents across the whole state to reduce their energy use to keep the grid from blacking out. I think we're in a better position in Arizona for a variety of reasons, but certainly kind of energy grid resilience is something that gets a lot of discussion as well. Texas is another state, unfortunately, that when they see these heat wave events, the grid will crash pretty consistently. So you know, infrastructure, energy use, water use, and I think like our urban ecology is something that I think of too. And so it takes more water to keep our vegetation alive during heat waves. But you know, we have urban wildlife here in Tucson that's really important, and obviously that's impacted by heat as well. So kind of, you know, holistically affects everything, even down to children's learning outcomes in schools is negatively affected by the heat. And so again, in Tucson, we're fairly fortunate. Most of our schools have air conditioning, but I guarantee that the schools that are able to afford to put up shade structures outside, probably in the richer school districts, probably have better connected parents than those lower income communities. So that's kind of something that I think of as well.
Thank you for those details, Lad, and important reminders, all of them. We're going to now ask Matt, why, and I'm curious, especially the people you talk to, why do you tell them to care?
It comes down to an impact. Extreme heat damages our community, not just individuals, but animals, also our infrastructure. I know that Lad's holding back and being good for 3 minutes, but there's also an effect, which I've heard him talk about on an infrastructure standpoint. And that's very important to the care and service to our whole community. I think that a big part of caring, we have here in Pima County, I was speaking with the Pima County Search and Rescue Unit, and not necessarily in jest, but they were talking about some of the stats that were just given reference to us. And we have a lot of people that don't take heat serious. We have a lot of visitors from other locations. One deputy told me maybe we should start putting signs in French and German saying, please take water and carry a hat. And that was a direct impact to the number of rescues they've had to do for people that are visiting our area that go on a hike when it's 108 outside with high humidity. And that's a real good reason why we should all be concerned about heat injuries as well as the impact to our community.
He will go in just a minute. Hang on.
Thank you, Matt. I'm recalling a case a few years ago when there were some visitors, perhaps they were German, who were at one of the resorts, and they went out and didn't make it back. It was a very sad story. Okay, I think that's Jackie now.
Yes, I think that in southern Arizona, or certainly in the Phoenix area for sure, too, we may think it's a kind of, well, we're used to the heat, it's not a big deal. But what we really emphasize in the workshops we give is that very likely, as several people have pointed out, the infrastructure is going to be affected, and the likelihood that the power is going to go off for an extended period of time means no air conditioning, the things that make it bearable, that we think, well, we know how to deal with the heat. It's not going to be like that. And I think there's going to be people who are going to not recognize that they're having a heat related event, such as a heat stroke at the worst. If our emergency services are compromised, they may not be able to get the help that they need. I'm going to read this because I just saw it in the newspaper yesterday. On Monday in the Star, they have the thing that talks about climate. And this is something I hadn't really thought of. It said, the title of it is Heat Pollution. The UN Weather Agency warns that the world's most frequent heat waves and fires will make the air we breathe even more unhealthful in the future. The World Meteorological Organization, WMO, said in a statement that air pollution already contributes to about 7 million deaths each year, and global heating is likely to make that number soar even higher. I won't read the rest, but you get the point. It's something that I hadn't thought about, emphasizing the effect on the air we breathe. We know it when we have wildfires near us, but it's much more widespread. That's all I have.
Thank you, Jackie. That was something that came out when I was doing some research for the city's Climate Adaptation Committee. That one of the threats is worse air quality. So thank you for bringing that up. And by the way, emergency services being compromised, I did get a call back from TEP. I'd invited them to come and be on a panel like this. They couldn't do it tonight, but they're very interested in a few weeks from now. So we'll talk about that at the end. Okay, our next question is, what can individuals do at home and on their block? Joe, would you like to start?
Sure. I look at that question as a factor scale. So as an individual or as a family unit, a household, I like, we worked together on working up on some posters, and I liked what your group put up: be prepared, stay informed. And we also know your neighbors and help your neighbors. I mean, at the granular level of your neighborhood, governments can't help you. I mean, they can enable you. So like the countries, federal governments, state and tribal and local governments, they all have roles in addressing the climate change mitigation and adaptation at the scale, policy level, and incentive levels. But they depend on the individuals, the communities, the neighborhoods to, and their policies need to enable the individuals, households, and communities to adapt and build resiliency. So I'll let Ladd go through the whole list of, well, a long list of different things people can do, but it kind of depends on where they are, where they live, what their economics are. I mean, so that gets back to stay informed, know where your risks are, know what you can do, and then become prepared.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Ladd, I think you're being cued to elaborate.
Yeah, and I'll leave some of it for Matt too, because I think he's probably the best person to speak to how people can be personally prepared. But I would say typically, if you can afford to do so, and I never assume that anyone in the audience that I'm speaking to can afford to do so, but if you have the opportunity to do so, shifting eventually towards more energy efficient appliances and air conditioning can help reduce waste heat, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, right? So those are all good things. Weatherizing your home, making sure that the doors and windows are airtight are all things that help during heat events and chronic heat. Using shade trees, supporting increased but xeriscape kind of drought friendly vegetation from the built environment perspective is good. And then I would echo what Joe said. Checking on neighbors, friends, families, family members who may be more vulnerable, and getting to know your neighborhood is really important. I, of course, am probably more concerned with the folks that are not on a Zoom like this and would not be on a Zoom like this. So, people experiencing homelessness, people who are probably still working or, have children and then a nighttime job and stuff. And, who just their lives are just not kind of enabling them to pay attention to these issues in the same way that we are. And so for those folks, I would say, if you're on this Zoom and you have the attention of our local government, make sure to share that opportunity and that opportunity for input with those who are, either voiceless or have less opportunity to speak and have that connection to the government. We have a lot of complex issues and trade-offs to consider with climate change and urban heat. And so some of them are at odds with each other. And so a couple that I think about is, we have goals to increase vegetation in Tucson to help reduce the urban heat island effect, but we also have a mega drought and we're trying to save scarce water resources. So kind of how do we balance that trade-off between water use and increasing vegetation? And I know we're a leader in green stormwater infrastructure, but if we get one of those unfortunate years where we don't have rainfall, the green stormwater infrastructure can't capture rain if it doesn't fall, right? And so in those cases, we may have to supplant that landscaping with groundwater, CAP water. So that's kind of a trade-off to think about. And then another one is we have a housing affordability crisis, across the country, but, our own homeless population in Tucson has grown exponentially the last couple of years. And then we just have a large number of families that just have poor quality housing that makes them unable to afford air conditioning, even if they do have an air conditioning unit. And so kind of it ties into important conversations about how to increase housing affordability, where do we want to put density in the city? Who's going to allow that to happen near their neighborhoods? And I think all important kind of community conversations that we need to keep having.
Wow, and would love to talk with you more about the compromise, or let us say the collaboration of those goals of water conservation and green infrastructure. Who knows, we might have time at the speed we're going tonight. So let's keep rolling. Matt, what would you like to say about what individuals can do at home and on their block?
There's a whole range of options. The basic important parts of that, though, are to have a plan, and that's the what if game. So we've mentioned a couple things, talking about being out of power, not having something. I grew up as a child as a swamp cooler kid, so I obviously having having backups is important. Having a kit to help deal with those is important. There's some very simple, inexpensive things we can do that people choose not to do. Having extra water, having an option, researching a little bit of, we're talking about heat, so some cooling options are very simple to do, and doing a little bit of research and making a plan that fits best for you and your family and your community and your neighbors. There's lots of other options. Getting not popular, but maybe to some, but generators are a really great idea. I know that there's a big push for the different types of generators, depending on what the option is for running them. Solar backup battery, that type of, also not quite as immediate as a generator, but that's another option. So there's lots of stuff out there in the public and online, and a lot of options that different organizations put out that can help you with the basics of building a plan, and also making a kit to help you in many different situations, and definitely in heat as well.
Great, thank you, Matt. And it is interesting. We don't like the idea of diesel generators putting smoke in the air when we're already dealing with excessive heat and so on. And yet, if we're looking at dying instead, we'd rather have that generator run. And these are the kinds of trade-offs we have to think about. Okay, and Jackie, what would you like individuals to do at home and on their block?
Well, as Keith pointed out, we're fortunate if we have a home. And so assuming we're talking about having a home, that's one place to start with. And I thought the video that you attached to the invitation to this event was pretty thorough, about making an assessment for your family as to what your needs are. For instance, if you have medications that need to be cooled, you'll have to think of some way that you're going to cool them if the power is out. But I still think the most important thing is to reach out and get to know your neighbors, because that's where I think that you get the support in an emergency, to know that you have resources you can share. We've gone through, I'm very fortunate. I not only have a home, but I also live in a very good neighborhood where we're quite cohesive and we meet regularly. And we have done assessments of what water we have stored, where would we go, how are we going to store power. We have solar, but we don't have the battery power, but we do have one home now that does, so we'll be huddling in their home if it got really bad. But I do think it's establishing cohesiveness in your neighborhood is so important. And of course, we emphasize the power being out as being the main thing that we in the summer. So I know there's other parts of the country and other places where there are different concerns, but we are talking about heat related. knowing who's vulnerable in your neighborhood that you would need to go check on immediately is another important thing. Of course, having plenty of water stored and food that's I like I think, oh, somebody was asked about the city, but I keep this on at the city of Tucson and South Tucson and various other entities did come up with a nice little thing that it's got a checklist of things that you need to have in your own personal home. And of course, we have a lot of information here that the Physicians for Social Responsibility shares with people that take our workshop.
Thank you, Jackie. What's the title of that brochure you were showing us?
The Citizens Guide for Readiness for Climate Extremes in the Desert Southwest.
Oh, this is the PSR one?
Yes.
Oh,
And then
great.
the other one that was a city is, and again, it has a lot of emergency numbers and things like that. It's just called a community preparedness tool.
Hmm.
And it has a little magnet on the back and on your fridge.
You have a moment to put a link to either of those, if they have such, that people might be interested.
Yes, I will talk more in one of the next questions about what we're doing and how to get a brochure.
Great. And by the way, so far, Ann and Sherry have both asked questions. Feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll make sure to get to those right away when we've done our rounds. Unless we should answer those now. Let me know if you want, but let's keep going then to question 4. What is your organization doing to reduce risks to the community? So this is your chance to teach us what your organization is about and how, and maybe there's some way we can help you or collaborate with you.
Well, you said the word collaboration. Pima County Health Department is got 2 extreme heat related projects going on. And these projects are about education, collaboration, and networking. That is their strategic advantage over some other organizations. For example, yours. I mean, your community-based organization is just integral in the whole solution of attacking this problem. From the Pima County Health Department, we've got one project. We're 8 months into it. It's a 5-year CDC Building Resilience Against Climate Effects. BRACE is the acronym. And it's to promote cooling centers and develop a climate and health strategic plan for the county. So in this, we collaborate with Lad, because he's part of the U of A's BRACE team, and he's helping us along with his other teammates, as well as Maricopa County, ASU, and ADHS, Arizona Department of Health Services. We're also working with the Pima County Office of Emergency Management, because there is an intersection between emergency response and then just non-emergency chronic problems. And so we collaborate, we're working up how to better collaborate, and we're real encouraged about the progress we've made so far. We've also just launched an EPA's School as Community Cleaner Air and Cooling Centers. Now, this is one of 4 communities across the nation, and they picked Pima County, and we picked Sunnyside Unified School District to use the contractor that EPA hired. This contractor has a lot of experience working with communities, and their goal is to design HVAC systems for Sunnyside's Unified School District through community collaboration? What are the needs? How do you, how do you address community needs and be technically and efficient use of resources? But this effort, just because it's Sunnyside School District, it'll help inform these HVAC systems for other facilities across the county. And like what you might be thinking about is like, what if the power goes out? Well, what keeps me up at night is thinking about assisted living, skilled nursing facilities, from large facilities to mom and pop operations. What happens if you have a long power outage? They're not designed that you can come in and plug in a remote, mobile generator to do, come in, plug it in, turn it on, get the facility cooled down, then go to your next facility that needs help. So it's like a rolling blackout. But
Joe, can we come back to this?
yeah,
I'm seeing this.
so that's what we're working on.
Exciting stuff. And I think we got some questions on that, so we'll hear more. Let's see. We are now going to ask Lad, what is your organization doing?
Yeah, so I'll speak mostly for myself, although of course the University of Arizona has a large number of faculty and staff kind of working on various aspects of climate change and community engagement. So definitely don't want to make it sound like I'm the only person doing things there. But, for my aspect, we've integrated climate change and climate action planning into, our particular course that's all about climate action planning, but we're integrating it across the curriculum for students. And so, I primarily teach urban planners, sometimes architects, landscape architects, sometimes public health professionals. And I think more than ever, they're coming out and graduating with the knowledge of climate science and how climate change affects their professions, which I think is really important. From the research project angle, like Joe mentioned, working our U of A team with Heidi Brown in public health is working with Joe on that CDC BRACE grant, which is pretty big, because we are connecting action up to the Arizona Department of Health Services. So that's a pretty exciting one. I have a NOAA funded grant, so the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, working with a couple of cities across the United States. And so looking at how their plans and policies are actually mitigating heat, and are they targeting those plans and policies to those most socially vulnerable and hottest neighborhoods. And so kind of developing a methodology for them to actually look at what their adopted plans are actually saying the future of their built environment will look like. And I'll mention too, we have a US Department of Transportation funded project in collaboration with the city of Tucson. And they had a pilot cool pavement product that was applied to Country Club Road south of Broadway. And it dried it's basically an asphalt rejuvenator that dried clear, but is supposed to work more akin to like a clear sunscreen that you would put on your body to reflect some of the heat. And so working with them to see the pre and post kind of data collection and see how well that treatment actually works, and if it's worth, spending more city of funds on kind of an investment like that. So we'll be giving that report to them by December. So kind of all across the board, but many exciting projects going on. And I'll mention too that the city of Tucson has a climate action plan that they're currently working on, and the public draft of that should be available in the next couple of months too. So that's something to keep an eye out for as well. And Stuart, I think your mic is off, so we can't hear.
For both those things. So there was a graduate student who was doing some research on the Oracle Street or Oracle Avenue corridor. Was she affiliated with you?
Probably not directly. But we have had planning students do different analyses of the Oracle Road corridor before. So maybe through our planning program, yeah.
Okay. And also for everyone's interest, Pima Community College just recently completed their climate action plan. And they are also very interested in infrastructural changes. But as Lad said, their goal is to have climate change awareness brought into every program in every class. Ultimately, you have to be careful with things like that, of course, because you can kill good ideas by making them mandates. But hopefully they'll do that in a sensitive way, where people can authentically and meaningfully touch on these topics. Matt, what is your organization doing to reduce risks for the community?
We're in a constant state of working with our community partners on all topics. Heat is just one of many. And when I say community partners, that means the community, the public, the individuals, organizations, but also departments within Pima County. Joe mentioned health department. We work with them on a lot of different stuff. This is just one thing. And we also partner with other groups and get important input. LAD has provided that on more than one occasion for us, as well as others. And it's working with other jurisdictions. So there's 5 municipalities in Pima County. There's 2 tribal organizations. There's a lot of folks that we partner with, and this is one of the many topics that we usually work with. I talked about working with other jurisdictions. I mentioned the Sheriff's Department. We partner with them as well as police departments and fire departments. Trying to reduce or mitigate some of the number of rescues. We have a high number of heat-related rescues because people don't heed a lot of the information that we put out about what they're doing outside. And just like in cold weathers where people are affected, obviously heat-related injuries happen as well. And then we also put out literature and public information pretty regularly in a lot of different forms. Jackie held up one of the things that we handed out. I don't know if we gave that to Jackie, but that's one of the documents that Pima County has jointly and individually put together. Some other stuff that we put out related to heat-related injuries.
Super. We really appreciate that spirit of collaboration, and I know it makes a big difference. Jackie, what is your organization doing?
Well, Physicians for Social Responsibility is a national organization. Here in Arizona, we have a branch of it locally, and in 2013, they had an event called Climate Smart Southwest, and out of that was very well attended. I was fortunate to get to. I was not involved with Physicians for Social Responsibility at the time, but I could see the great need for people at the ground level working on this. I did join the organization. They were formed to help with take on things that were very threatening to mankind. And one of the first things and they're still working on it, is to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons. So that's a huge thing that they're on. But now it's climate change is equally threatening the human race. And so they've taken that on, and they did give us some grants to start the workshops that we're doing and print the materials and things that are for the workshops. So what we're doing is trying to get the word out, and that's been the hardest part, to get neighborhood groups to sign up for our workshops. And it was quite fun to do when we were doing them in person. We would hope we'd get like 12 to 15 neighborhood people, and they would do an assessment on their how well they work together, how much they know each other, how resilient their neighborhood is, and just give them a lot of information on how to prepare, assuming that the power would go out and probably the pumps would not work to bring water uphill to Tucson. So there'd be a lot of things to consider about preparedness, and working with your neighbors is what we really emphasize, but also in your home preparedness as well. So unless, we'll wait for questions about more of that, because I'm not sure what more to share at this point.
Thank you, Jackie. That'll be fun to share. As I mentioned before, Gladys and I were inspired by the workshop that was provided by PSR 4 years ago. Yeah,
I did say when the pandemic hit, we did get together on Zoom and created a Zoom scenario, where we could do the workshop by Zoom. So that was kind of interesting, and we did get a grant to do that, and the requirements were that we would, give these workshops in disadvantaged areas, which is a real problem because they don't necessarily have computers and laptops to do this by Zoom. So it's been a challenge.
Yes to all. And I'm watching the chat. We're accumulating some really great questions, which we will get to from those attending today after our last one for a go round. And this, I'd like to thank our planning group for this question in particular. As individuals, most of us are probably aware that we contribute to the climate problem every time we turn on our ACs, drive our cars, etc. In other words, living as human beings in this society, we are creating carbon emissions. Yet these decisions are made inevitable by the structures in which we are living. How can we change the structures so that doing the best thing for the environment that we share, so that doing the best thing is inevitable rather than doing a damaging thing is inevitable? We don't expect a total solution, but any thoughts you have in that direction, we would love to hear, starting with Joe.
Well, at the health department, we try to meet people where they are. And there's a whole continuum of where people are. So as individuals, there's the adoption based on many factors. Am I breaking up? Say something. I think I'm losing internet.
We can hear you, but there was a fair amount of static. Do you want to try again?
Sure. Yeah. So as individuals, we fall on somewhere on the adoption continuum based on many factors, economic, education, whatever. So you may have heard of it, like you have innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority. So we need to get out of the way of the innovators and early adopters. These individuals have already insulated their homes, practiced water conservation, water harvesting, converted to renewable energy sources as much as possible. But then you have the early majority and late majority. And like the recent Biden, Senate and the new legislation that came through that is basically the carrot, in providing incentives to adapt to buying solar, electric vehicles, and the health department can't provide incentives, but they can help by providing education and getting people aware of possibilities of what they can do. And I think that's what the federal, state, tribal, and local governments are better at, is incentives and education. And over time, more and more people will be change to structures, as you put it, that are more conducive to mitigating climate change. Then you got the laggards, and I guess research is that approximately 16% of the population could be classified as that. And you know, to get to those people, it's going to be market prices and regulations eventually, but that's not what you should probably lead with. And then they will change because they have no choice but to change. So kind of think about the evolution of the light bulb recently, going from incandescent to, I mean, there was real pushback, but then there were the people that were out buying those as soon as possible. And I think the last election cycle, there was still pushback against the incandescent bulbs. So that's kind of how I view how we change, and that's incrementally and through a longer term, a long view approach.
Thank you, Joe. It's fun to hear those categories, the innovators all the way to the laggards. So let's hear from Lad. How do we change the structures?
Yeah, well, I like what Joe said, and I like the general framing of this question altogether too, because typically, you know, if it all just is kind of like what can individuals do and not recognizing that we need the systems to change, I think it's kind of a short answer to that question and not a very satisfying one. But yeah, I think first of all is just participating and engaging in all levels of our democracy, and I think that's probably the most important thing that I would say we all need to keep our eyes on, and making sure that we have a functional democracy. Because if our democracy is not functional and not inclusive, it's going to be really hard to move forward on issues that you know are important to the most marginalized and vulnerable in our society. So I think that's one important thing. And then the second thing is, just as an urban planner, a sustainable and resilient city, Tucson or any other city in the United States, to make them more sustainable, emit less greenhouse gas emissions, to make them more resilient, you know, absorb less heat and contributing less to that urban heat island effect. You know, our urban areas are going to have to look a little bit different. And some people, many people may be uncomfortable with the idea of denser cities that are more walkable, more transit use, more active transportation, like bicycling. But I think we just can't continue to build our cities kind of dependent on automobiles with large parking lots and large roadways, kind of sprawling out of control. Just the cost to the local governments is unsustainable. So I think kind of, you know, again, kind of having important community conversations about what that looks like in Tucson, I think is really important. And so it's going to be a little bit denser. It's going to rely a little bit less on automobiles. And I don't think we need to make that change overnight, but we certainly need to allow more people more options. And so, you know, that goes back to the housing affordability question. We're simply building not enough housing, and it's all the wrong type of housing that a large proportion of our population can no longer afford. And so I think the single family home for a lot of our community is just simply out of the price range for their entire lifespan. So thinking about like apartment buildings, condos, townhouses, things to get people off the street, things to give families places to live. And in Tucson, that means that we may have to be open to the idea of having more neighbors than we used to. So I think that's something that we have to kind of think through, and both the resilience and the sustainability aspects of that.
Thank you. A lot to think about there. Okay, Matt, what would you add?
I'm not sure this is so much my area of expertise. I think Lad had some really good input. So Joe, I'm sure Jackie will as well. There's some great technology, at least in the last 10, 20 years, as it pertains to insulation and making sure, if you look at any new homes these days, you can't go past the front door to see how they're touting the increased insulation and more better use of electricity and all kinds of different ways. As that technology gets better, maybe that would be part of the answer, but it's very complicated, and I was kind of surprised to see the question, because I think this one could go for hours rather than 3 minutes. But I think that's pretty much it for me. So I'm gonna let Jackie go. Maybe she's got some better ideas on how to frame this.
Thank you, Matt. You're right. This is a big think question for sure. But let's give Jackie a try for 3 minutes. I have to unmute.
I had to read the question a few times. to get a sense of, it's hard to talk about structures and not think about the city or, or the broader question, not our own structure. Then I thought, well, was it maybe just the structure of government, or is it just actual house, that we're talking about, or housing? Of course, I live in a co-housing community, which is so ideal, that we are connected in a small community, and we do work together, we collaborate, we share resources so that we're not duplicating everything. I would hope that city planners go more for small communities, walkable communities, public transit available. But the word that really struck me when I read it, and I underlined it 3 times, was share. And it's more, of course, in a different context than the question had it. But for me, getting to know your neighbors, even if you're not living in a structured co-housing community, but you can get to know your immediate neighbors, have social events, really get to know them, and work on plans, but how you would help each other. But ideally, intentional communities, I think, is the way to go. And how that works, of course, it's not workable for everybody. So it kind of befuddles me to talk about this in any broad sense of how it would work for most people.
But you've planted a seed of thought for us, and I think we will keep that in our minds. And thank you so much for these answers to these prefabricated questions. And now we've got some that are just coming out of the emergent group here. I'm going to start by just going down the chat box first, and then others, if you'd like to respond to something that's said in response to one of those questions, raise your hand. Al? No, you are not muted, but sorry we can't hear you. I wonder if your microphone's not connected. Al, why don't you work on that? And we're going to go up to Anne asked, what is the city or county doing about the spread of, this is Anne Wee, N-W-E. What is the city or county doing about the spread of buffalo grass in urban areas? Should I be spraying near my home? And I suppose this relates because buffalo grass is a threat to our natural ecology, and it's a high fire risk. Does anyone feel equipped to answer that question from our panel?
I can probably handle that. There's been a few grants related to that. There's been a lot of activity over the years. You'll see a lot of communities do buffalo grass roundups where they'll go and pull it out of their community. Not that the county's endorsing Save Our Saguaros, but we partner with them on occasion for their roundup. Buffalo grass is very invasive. It's a huge wildfire risk, burns like wood, grows like grass. It's kryptonite pretty much for the desert. So I'm not a biologist, but I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. I don't think they've had any solutions. To answer the question, around your home, I would pull it. Keep us safe. I don't want to get in another, I know we don't have much time, and I've got to our hour is up here, so I got to get moving here shortly, but I would keep a defensible space around your house. Please don't let buffalo grass grow up to your house. If that's one of the questions, I'm sorry, I didn't see that one currently. So make sure you've got a defensible space, pull it. I don't know specifically of any weed poisons, if you're looking for that would affect it. I think the best is probably to pull it or make sure that you beat it down enough to where it's not growing successfully near you.
Thanks, Matt. And Lad, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just really quickly, there's a number of organizations. Of course, Matt with Pima County Office of Emergency Management have successfully gotten a number of large grants to help with buffalo grass, but a number of other nonprofits working, and the Beat Back the Buffalo Grass campaign, I think, is one of those. And just, I think Matt's correct. Most folks will agree that we probably can't entirely eliminate it, but we have to make sure that we're not encouraging its spread. And so I think one thing that I look to as a positive sign is the city of Tucson for a long time has been installing green stormwater infrastructure, but did not have the funds to actually maintain it once it was put into place. So now they have that small fee that's tagged onto the water bill for the green stormwater infrastructure fee, and that will help with the maintenance of the infrastructure that they're installing. Because unfortunately, green stormwater infrastructure along roads is kind of the perfect habitat for buffalo grass to take over. So we want to make sure that we do green infrastructure, but that we maintain it to make sure that it doesn't become kind of an oasis for invasive species too.
Thank you both. Matt, it sounds like you may need to leave shortly, so I'm going to cherry pick the questions that go directly to you first and then come back. I think I want to talk to some of the others I may have mentioned. We thought we'd go an hour and a half, but if you need to go before then, please.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Absolutely, I did put my contact information in. So if there's anybody has any other questions, feel free to contact me via email or phone or whichever is easiest.
Do you have a moment there were a couple of things that you want to just touch on for a moment? Okay, one is, you mentioned personal cooling options. Is there a resource that you can recommend?
Yeah, let me bring up the question so I'm a little more informed. I'm sorry. The cooling options are basically just stuff that people here in the desert have been doing forever. Obviously wearing cover, a hat, making sure you have loose fitting clothing, making sure that you're obviously hydrated is a great place to start. Those are all simple ones that you'll find on anything. If you did a Google search, that you would have a huge list. The health department puts out some of that documentation. I think I have some around my desk actually talking about making sure how to basically be dressed and what to be prepared with when you're out in the sun, not necessarily hiking, but just the general exposure to the sun.
And in fact, the county health department has a web page about heat.
Right.
So, and that some of you saw that in one of our mailings, but I can put that. Or Joe, is that something you can put in the chat box?
I'm at home. No,
Oh, okay.
But just all you have to do is Google heat and Pima, and you'll get the website, which we're going to be updating over the fall and winter. So stay tuned.
Okay, thank you, Joe. And then Trace was interested, Matt, what are your plans for a power outage longer than 72 hours? And
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to preface by saying it's not that you are going to solve the power outage, but what do you do during those 3 days when there's a power outage?
Well, there's lots of different things. So there's lots of different jurisdictions in Pima County, and it's a layered approach, obviously. So let's say if that exposed area to an outage, like for instance, we had one recently in the city of Tucson, they're going to activate their plan depending on the exposure, the time, and the amount. We're talking about 72 hours. The first thing I always encourage is to make sure that we've done some personal responsibility. We've done some planning to make ourselves as resilient as possible. And I don't want to beat that to death, but really making sure that you have a plan and you've made a kit to make sure that if that's one of your concerns, which I would suggest, make sure that you put some time into that. Some of the general stuff that you're going to get from not necessarily a 72 hour, because it could be a lot shorter than that before you see cooling centers opening them up. Those are all options that you'll see some of the jurisdictions, including Pima County, that'll open during a power outage. You're going to see some of the other options there for amounts of water, some other places that you might be able to get for cooling other than cooling stations. But anything longer than 72 hours, I mean, 72 hours is what FEMA and all emergency management suggests for being prepared. After that, there's going to be during and after, there'll be cooling centers and lots of other options that'll be publicized and put out. Specific plans are the same plans, the skeleton play we do for most disasters. And it's important to be flexible in those situations. So there's not a specific heat related plan. It's what's affecting our community and how we're going to utilize the resources we have to address that problem.
And I'd like to add to that, the Western US is not Texas. It's much more regulated and integrated and networked. So, I mean, what you saw recently in California was rolling blackouts as opposed to a whole system failure. And then also you were talking about cooling centers during emergencies. There's a whole tier 3, I think we've called it. It's where the Red Cross comes in. They have limited resources and facilities. They've got agreements with, say, schools, so they'll open up gymnasiums and whatever and provide cooling centers during an emergency response. Pima County Health Department is working with cooling centers with existing facilities that work all the time during the heat. So they make it inviting and tell people, like, for people that don't have air conditioning, they can go to these facilities and cool off, as opposed to emergency management is that when you have a large blackout area with no power and other emergencies, they'll come in and set up a cooling center with resources from the Red Cross and other facilities. So it can be confusing, but they're very distinct mechanisms of providing cooling centers.
Yeah, and I'd like to just reiterate what Joe said really quickly, and kind of what Matt was saying too, that Texas is kind of the worst case scenario for how you operate a grid, right? A power grid. California is in a different situation than Arizona, because they have a large proportion of a huge population that is usually in a temperate climate. And so their air conditioning is not running at max all of the time, even during the summer. Arizona is different because our power is set up a little bit differently. And our air conditioners are largely running all of the time. So when we have a heat wave, we will see an energy spike, but it's not the same type of energy spike that you would see in a place like California too. So I think probably more likely is what Matt was kind of talking about is, the situation where we have a storm, neighborhoods go out for a while, TEP repairs it. Not the same kind of situation in Texas where you would see an entire city kind of black out for an extended period of time. I think that's pretty unlikely here, but we certainly should plan for, worst case scenarios and just have kind of an awareness of what could happen. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Trace, did you have anything to follow up with Matt before he leaves?
Well, yeah, basically, I think that Vlad's statement that an extended blackout is not likely is certainly true, that it's not likely, but I do believe there actually is a small set of scenarios which could lead to an extended regional blackout. And I am quite convinced we're unprepared for that.
Well, I mentioned tiered approach. So if the city can't handle it, and then the county would move in. If one county can't handle it, we draw on our neighbors. Here in the southern region, we're pretty tight. Then the state can. I guess I don't know the scenarios that you made. There's lots of different plans. I mean, For instance, right now, we're going through the mass evacuation plan redo for Pima County. That plan started many decades ago, and it's a lot less likely to ever happen because nobody really wants to blow up a bunch of boneyard planes anymore. Not that that's not a possibility. And so that's why we have those plans, and they're still updated regularly. But yeah, there's a lot of thought along those lines, and there's also a tiered approach to make sure to mitigate that. But if an asteroid hit and took out all of the power in an area, you're absolutely right, that could happen. The likeliness of that is probably not real good. Knock on wood.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about asteroids or coronal mass ejections, but actually, I think there is a small class of climate-related shutoffs that actually are a threat. So actually, I should send you something so I have your contact information.
So Matt, please stay for any amount of time you can more, but not a second longer.
Yes, sir.
So thank you so much. We've got another 15 minutes before we close. Lots of great questions. Joyce says, are you saying the cooling centers have backup generators? Who can answer that one?
That's probably a me again. So
Okay.
there's lots of backup generators at different places. Some of those places would be Pima County libraries. Some of those places, traditionally not really, in the past, we haven't opened for cooling centers, which are schools, but most of the schools, not all of them, have backup generators. Pima County also has added some of their assets or wheeled generators, so we could turn a place that maybe wasn't have a backup generator. We could utilize that with some of our wheeled assets. So there's again another tiered approach with a lot of different options. We don't usually broadcast everywhere where we would do a cooling center because unfortunately there's a lot of bad actors out in the world, and so that's why you don't see a map of every shelter everywhere. And we don't usually broadcast that stuff because of those reasons, and unfortunately sometimes threats from people. So that's why there are plans and lots of options for that, but they're not necessarily broadcast. But yes, there's lots of different generator options that we have here in Pima County.
Thank you. It helps to know that you're thinking about such things. And sidebar, one of the things we learned last summer was that Tucson Water has what's called a clean room for their operations of the water, so that people can't get in there from via the internet, for example, if they did want to pull a prank on the water company. And that kind of thoughtfulness obviously makes the community much more relaxed, knowing that people are thinking about these aspects. Now, here's to change the topic just a little bit. Beryl has pointed out that just be careful when you talk about buffalo grass, it is a different thing from the buffalo grass, which you can all look up if you'd like to. Lad then put in the chat, Tucson Clean and Beautiful, buffalo grass education removal. Tucson Clean and Beautiful is good for just about everything we need to know here in Tucson for a sustainable community. So there's one more thing they're helping on. Jana put in the message for those who are interested, a few suggestions on how to kill the buffalo grass seeds without putting poison on the ground. Jana is one of the advocates for no toxics in our soil or our streets. And Lad, thank you for the website for Pima County's heat relief. Okay, so let's see. Joyce said, "Are the cooling centers the ones that get backup generators? Is that how that works?"
Some do, not all, depending on their location. For instance, you wouldn't move an area that has an outage. You probably wouldn't utilize that area. You would want to move folks out of an area that would have an outage. So that some may have them, but there's a lot of trade craft the industry has a lot of basic requirements for those type of situations to move people to a safer environment and not necessarily stay in one location.
Okay, thank you. And Julia had a question which I could answer. That is Joe Tabor, who's a family member, I imagine, is named Holly. And Joe Tabor is the lead environmental epidemiologist at Pima County Health Department. So, Julia, that's for your information. Joyce wonders, would Raytheon be a more likely target than Boneyard Plains?
It would be, but their footprint, while may look large, it's really small in the big picture. What if you've been here a little bit, if you're old like me and you've been here for a long time, there used to be missile silos here when I was a youngster, and they were very they were thought to be from military intelligence experts that those would be something somebody would want to blow up real bad. And those have been gone for a really long time. So that's a much more inviting target than probably Raytheon was. Not that Raytheon and Raytheon has had issues with bad actors trying to do bad things to them, but not so much nuclear strikes, I think.
Okay. Jumping around now, we're almost done with these chat box questions. Julia asked, what is the name of the school where some of the ideas are being tested? I think that's to you, Lad. You mentioned a school. Was it Sunnyside?
I'm not sure what that's referring to. I mentioned a pilot project on Country Club Road for cool pavement, but that was on the actual road itself. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I mentioned we have an EPA grant that they're hiring an engineering and public outreach firm to design HVAC systems for some of their facilities at Sunnyside School District, and to improve their capability as being a cooling center and improve the quality of air. Asthma is one of the major factors that keeps kids out of school. So if we can improve the air quality inside schools and other facilities, that would really improve school attendance.
That's big. And thank you, Joe.